Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our podcast, Beyond the Yellow Tape. This is Nidhi Shade, and we have Julian. Today's guest is really special for our podcast, and it's a really special guest from Julian. So I'll let Julian introduce him.
All right, guys. So today our special guest is Pat McLaughlin. He's actually my classmate and teacher from John Jay. After he graduated from being my classmate, he became my teacher. So that was pretty cool. He actually has 20 years as a New York City officer, then detective. Did a lot of time in the evidence collection team. So he knows a lot more than us about the things we want to know. So let's get right into the episode. But before we do that, guys, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And let's get into the episode. All right, so we're here with Pat McLaughlin, and so let's get straight into it. So, Pat, tell us what your daily routine is as part of the NYPD evidence collection team.
The evidence collection team, to draw a little bit of a difference between the crime scene unit that more people are familiar with, the evidence collection team is borough-based. So Manhattan, Queens, Staten Island, Bronx, Brooklyn all have their own evidence collection teams. So you would be responding mostly to crime scenes that happen in that particular set of precincts that you're assigned to. And the work is similar to what you would imagine a crime scene response would be. If you're needed, you go to the scenes, you're doing the photography, whatever investigations need to be done, working with the detectives, collecting the evidence, invoicing the evidence, submitting the evidence. It would then go to the crime lab, and they'll do their particular sorcery with it. And at later junctions, you'll be liaisoning with the detectives again, and you'll be liaisoning with district attorneys in a lot of cases.
Okay. Are there any people on that evidence collection team who may be civilians, or is it all sworn officers?
No, everybody in the in ECT is a sworn officer.
Okay.
For you to be a part of the team, do you compulsory have to be a sworn officer, or
Yes,
it's an either or situation? Okay.
Yes.
Why is that a requirement in for your job?
I think right now it's a requirement because it always has been.
Okay.
As tradition had stated, you're bringing the sworn officers through the rank of police officer, then into detective, then they go into whatever forensic unit they're going into. I think in a lot of ways there was a resistance to make civilians, the crime scene responding officers or the crime scene responding agents, whatever word you like using, because they didn't have the experience. A lot of the things that you should be learning on patrol will eventually help you in being an investigator, because you've responded to so many scenes, and you've secured so many scenes that you start to learn to realize what is of value in an evidence case, or what statements you might be wanting to ask people just out of repetitive nature. The idea that you bring a civilian in, they don't have the experience, they don't have that level of training, quote unquote, they would be no good in the field. And that philosophy is starting to shift in a lot of ways. So you're going to see that shift from you have to be a sworn officer to they're going to have more and more civilians attending these jobs.
Right.
So even sorry, Julian, one.
Go ahead.
So do you think that even if you have a master's or a bachelor's in forensics, it's still not sufficient enough to get a job in your unit, or is it just because that they don't have the experience or the knowledge?
Well, to get into the unit, again, because it's a sworn officer thing, and I do have to have this conversation with a lot of my students who say, I'm going to join the NYPD or something along those lines, and because I want to be in crime scene, or I want to be in the crime lab, and I'll tell them, are you willing to be a police officer first and go to the police academy and do all of that? Because as of right now, that's the path you have to follow.
Oh.
And even within that, you're kind of rolling the dice. There's 33,000 NYPD officers. There's 300 of them in the evidence collection teams, and there's 60 of them in the crime scene unit. So you're going to have to hope that you have exactly everything in alignment to get into that unit. I lucked out because when I went into it, it was a volunteer thing. They were literally looking for people to go into these units. And I kind of did okay, I'll give it a shot. And I had no seniority. None of the senior people wanted to do it because it was new and it sounded weird and change. And I, like where I am. And even that took 2.5 years. And I finally got a phone call one day out of the clear blue telling me I'd been moved into this unit. So there's a weird process by which you would go into it through the sworn officer. And I don't ever want people to go into this thinking, yes, I'm definitely going to be assigned to this because I have a master's in forensics. I know a couple of people that have had either bachelor's or master's in very advanced fields that never got the assignment that they were really ideally suited for.
So there is definitely a misconception out there, because I always thought you could be a part of the evidence collection unit if you have master's or bachelor's in forensics, but that's definitely not the case.
No, you would have people listen to you and want to help you get into it, but a lot of it is luck of the draw. Again, when I first was supposed to go into the evidence collection team, they didn't have any openings, and it took 4 years to get an opening into it. If you're working in the lab and you say, "Oh, I want to work in ballistics," ballistics is the kind of unit that people go to die in. Like, yeah, I know I'm here 35 years. I am not leaving this because this is what I do and this is what I love doing. So there's a lot that you have to take into consideration, especially if you're not thrilled about the concept of being a sworn officer and you're only doing it to get this one particular assignment.
So is the evidence collection unit and crime scene investigation unit the same, or are they different?
That depends on who you ask and how angry they get.
Okay.
Ostensibly, they are the same unit.
Okay.
The evidence collection teams, like I said, are borough-based.
Mhm.
The crime scene unit is citywide. The evidence collection teams take care of the vast majority of forensic cases. So they do burglaries, robberies, they do shootings, stabbings, everything up to homicides and everything up to rapes that involve someone that is unknown to the victim. And they're the ones that handle department investigations, because theoretically, as a police officer, I can't investigate another police officer, et cetera, et cetera. So they handle all of those level of cases. The evidence collection team handles everything else. Everything from someone stole my car stereo to someone stabbed me repeatedly and I didn't die. But there's also always a weird sort of overflow, because midway through the several shooting scenes I've done, someone has come up to me and said, they lost her on the table, so now you're committed to doing this and it's a homicide. Or it turns out her description of the attacker was incorrect and we really don't know who this is. So there's, as much as we say that there's rules and there's barricades and barriers, they get grayed out just because there's no, criminals don't have a standard operating procedure. So ours is almost like a farce to try to make one.
Okay.
Thank you.
That makes a lot of sense. So I guess one of the definitely points of the show is we always try to help people see that like life doing forensics is really different from how they see on TV. So you being in the field for 20 years and especially going to the scene and getting evidence and collecting evidence, can you tell us how that may be different from what people might think that job might entail on a television show?
Well, it's funny you say that, because since you were in my class, I've started to make the CSI Effect required textbook.
Really?
And it's a good read, but I think actually right now where we're at with the murder in Idaho, in Moscow, Idaho, is a tremendous example of the perception versus the reality. And it's very difficult to make people understand that investigations proceed at the speed of the investigation, and that's it. We can't will evidence to be there. We can't will the probative evidence to be present where we can see it and immediately recognize it. We're used to CSI, and they go out and they collect the evidence, and there's cool, like some club music playing in the background. and they
Right.
run it through the thing that lights up a couple of times, and then, there it is. Here's your bad guy. And it's 30 seconds worth of footage, but it's actually 14, 15 hours worth of work. Working in a crime scene, I think my record was 36 straight hours because there's just that much to do and get done. And I think people lose sight of the tedium to it, and the doing the measurements and making sure that you change your gloves 14 times over before you go from one piece to the next piece, making
Right.
sure everything is lined up in little bags so you know precisely where everything is. And then of course the paperwork is its own thrilling episode. There's never like a CSI paperwork episode, if you notice. None of them are ever like trying to submit things to their supervisor to get signed off on. So
Right.
there's more work to it. There's a lot more precision to it than I think people understand. It doesn't, if you like doing it, it doesn't diminish the work at all. Like I never cared about any of that stuff. That's going to do what I love doing was the important part.
Okay. Good point.
So with your experience and as an officer, do you get trained how to handle a crime scene, or was it something that you just through your experience learned that this is how it's done?
Little bit of both.
Okay.
There was the very first scene that I ever secured as a rookie in Manhattan was the Carnegie Deli massacre, as they refer to it. So that was a gigantic step in my life of, whoa, this is harsh. And the crime scene unit people that were there actually took a few minutes to explain what they were doing and why they were doing it. So you get little
What
bits
year
of
was that?
97, 98.
Okay.
We're not aging me now, are we?
No.
We're put, you're put into something along those lines. And then when I got into the evidence collection team, I received very specific training, and I had senior people that I worked with that again did the right thing and spent a lot of time making sure that you knew, maybe don't hold the feather duster that way, hold it this way. Make sure when you're using the swab, you're using it like this and not just like the picture in the textbook shows you. You pick up little things along those lines, but I also really loved it. So I started going out and getting independent training. I went to Penn State for forensic entomology, and I, did a couple of online classes, then eventually leading me into John Jay because I wanted to pursue the scientific portion of it as well. But, the training is always out there. If you can find it and you have the patience to wait for it to come around, it'll pop for you.
That's very, yeah. That's important because we only think that this is what you get trained in school and now we're all good to go, but that's not usually the case.
Yeah, in fact, I've had one or two trainees that have degrees in forensics, and I was like, time out. What exactly do you think you're going to do when you get here? Because they may have been trained X, Y, or Z, but the protocols and the procedures of the NYPD or DE and F, and Boston Police may have something else that it does differently. So, it's good to, even if you have the knowledge, to get retrained from ground zero so everybody's on the same page.
So would you have any experiences where you would have seen that someone who is not trained or hasn't done something that you have done, like got training from outside, have not messed up is a strong word, but like
messed up's a good word.
So messed up evidence collection or messed up a case in some way or the other?
Oh yeah, it happens where people that either didn't get the training yet or were out sick the day we did the in-service training or something along those lines, and later on you come over and you go, why? Oh no, I'm just gonna back out and not make eye contact with you and hope that this is just a nightmare. And it does happen, and you have to do your best to try to get it up and fix it to the best of your ability. And sometimes it's fixable, and other times it's just, the material is lost.
Oh, good. Do people generally accept that they can't handle this scene and look for a replacement, or everybody just goes as the task that's been assigned?
In terms of what?
So say, for example, if I'm not trained to handle a homicide, or if I'm not trained to handle a massacre, and I've been assigned to that task, maybe I missed a training. can I report to my superior or my supervisor saying that I was not there at the training or I don't know how to do it? Can someone else take my place?
The way it will typically work, and without very specific training, like I was trained to recover video from TLC cars and things along those lines. So maybe there's only a few people that know that specifically, but in general, um, you don't get to handle a case until you're trained for it.
True.
So you have all of the materials at your disposal. Maybe you've never seen one before, and depending on who your training officer is, they may throw you to the wolves, but they also may coax you through it. And sometimes it's not the worst thing in the world to go there with someone that's very senior and turn and look at them and have them go, no, go ahead, you do it. I will I will stop you before you do something tragic, but reason through it for yourself and start to think critically about what you're seeing. And that's how you get to be a better and better investigator in these situations. If I just tell you how to do ABCD every single time on a Friday night, if I took off and you couldn't remember what comes after C, you're not in a good place.
Yeah, but that's a good support to have for sure, to know that. Yeah.
True. So you talk about going to scenes. Could you just briefly explain to us maybe as to some of the tension associated with being an officer on the street and just how it is pretty much?
You mean attention in terms of between the public and the police?
Yeah, doing the job and just trying to do your job without any bias, even collecting evidence without any bias and stuff like that, and just maybe even coming across victims or alleged suspects who might have, fled the scene, and this might be a person. Just the different types of tensions and the different ways they happen on the job.
It's very weird in a lot of ways. We have had interactions with people that would normally hate us on a level that you cannot explain. And I mean like hard gang members who one of them has been shot and you go to the hospital and there's guys with tattoos of teardrops who can't do enough to help you. And, we think that maybe he did this and maybe he did that. And this, I know I heard 2 gunshots and I really think he was in that corner. And okay, it's weird because you're all right. And then on the same night, you'll go to someone who has a residential burglary who doesn't even want you to come in because they're afraid of the police and that they don't want anything done with this, but they want you to be there to catch the bad guy without actually coming into the scene. Like the tensions that we experience, and I think probably the easiest way to explain it is especially in New York City, the variety of people that we run into. When I was very new to the job, I wanted to be in the hostage negotiation team. And I went to a seminar to learn how to be a hostage negotiator, and this is going to be awesome. And I'm there with my ballpoint pen and my clipboard. And the instructor had said, he was this little guy with a Marine buzz cut, and he had said, you have to understand the culture and the mores of the people that live in the neighborhood that you serve. And I kind of smirked. And since I looked like I was 12 and I kind of giggled, he made a beeline to me. And he's like, do you think something's funny about the way I said that? I said, well, no, it's not funny, but I'm trying to figure out, like, how would I ever know what the mores and the culture, the people that I serve is? And he looked at me almost annoyed and said, well, where do you work? I went, Midtown Manhattan. and he kind of did okay, well, this guy can negotiate a dispute between an Egyptian and an Eskimo and not think there's anything weird about that. The rest of us have to be, a little more dialed into the situation. I think tension arises when we bring it with us to a scene. I never, ever introduced myself as Detective McLaughlin to a victim. I was always Pat, because you've had a really bad day. And the formality of me trying to, put my superimposing self in your face is not going to help it. dial it down a little bit for the victim. If I need to do crowd control or take control of it, yes, I can certainly step it up. But when you work within certain environments, you come to get a feel for, how am I supposed to play this room? The last few years have been very awkward because of the sheer volume of tension between police and the communities that surround them. But
Right.
even within that, there are people that work very, very hard to say, all right, look, we're here to do a job, and this is the job I'm here to do. And yelling and screaming is not going to get it done any faster or any slower. I'm going to ask you the same 5 questions, whether you're mad at me or you're not mad at me. And I'm going to try to do my best to help you, even though you're making me want to not help you more and more every time you scream at me. But like you said in the question, is how do you avoid bias? I pose that to the students all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And bias isn't always the worst thing in the world to have, because bias is also a learning capability. And I'm not talking about racial bias or sexual tension or
Yeah.
anything along those lines. But I brought up the case to a student one day. I said, if you're walking, you get done with class, you guys all go out to the bar, you leave, and as you're walking up the street, there are 2 people walking towards you, and one of them stops near the lamppost and the other one keeps walking past you. And as you get to the lamppost, the guy who stopped there says, oh, do you have a cigarette, or do you have the time? And when you go to look at your watch, you get hit from the behind and your wallet gets stolen.
Mm-hmm.
Next week, we get done with class. You guys all go out drinking again, which we have to talk about how often you go drinking. And the same scenario happens. And as you're walking up the street, 2 people walking towards you, one person stops, the other one keeps going. And as you get near the person, he says, hey, do you have a light or a cigarette or something? What are you going to do? Probably
Right.
fall on the ground or run around the person, or turn around and walk the other way.
Mm-hmm.
Is that biased? Yeah. You had a
True.
negative
True.
experience with something, you learned in some way, shape, and or form, and it has dictated your behavior. And that poor guy that's standing by the lamppost probably thinks you're a lunatic, but you don't have any other data to work through that scenario with.
Right.
And sometimes it's not the worst thing in the world. If you have experiences, and every one of us has something that's a little bit different that we bring to the table, a lot of times that's how we work through our problems. Like, I've seen this before, or I had experience with this, or I remember that other time that this happened. It was similar to this. Um, so, I try to tell people that you approach every single crime scene like it's the first one you've ever been to. It's entirely new and unique. The example I'll give is, we have 2 people living next door in matching condos that are identical twins, and their parents bought them matching furniture, and they were both broken into on the same day. That's 2 different crime scenes. That's not the
True.
same one with, someone that looks a lot like the other person. So
Right.
that type of bias you try to avoid, but you also try to bring in your own personal learning experiences that have caused you to, change up how you do things.
Yeah, that's a really, really good advice. That brings me to my follow-up question. So when you talk about when Julian asked the question about the differences that you might or any resilience that you might have had with your other people, uh, if you go to a crime scene and when you're doing the evaluation and things like that, have you had difficulty in working with different groups at the crime scene? Like if someone is from the medical examiner's office or someone is from other departments and they have their own way of working. uh,
Um,
how does that usually work?
Very rarely.
Okay.
I'll be honest. Very, very rarely do we have those issues with people. Sometimes we have issues with a patrol units not securing the crime scene or not having enough people out to secure, but that's also their own manpower issues. We've never had like a turf war with the OCME, or especially in Manhattan. We worked with so many federal agencies. It was never anything along those lines. It's interesting when you show up to a crime scene and the whole can of alphabet soup is there, the FBI and the ATF and the
Mm.
DEA and the super secret ninja squads are all there doing their things. But um, what they do on an administrative level and what they do in the higher ups as they're arguing who's taking this case has nothing to do with us. So we're just all there to do what we're supposed to do.
I have another basic question. Like, how does the response work? Like, if there's a burglary, someone calls 911, what is the process like in reality than what's shown on TV? Like, how do you get informed and what are the steps taken?
You mean like how
The
the special victim squad always shows up and the crime scene
Yes,
unit's already there? Yeah,
exactly.
that's
Yes. The ninjas.
yep, the secret squirrel squad. They're always out there. It will work off direct notifications, and depending, there's always variations because again, there's no standard operating procedure when you bear it all down. A lot of times the first responding officers will go there. They'll start to take the report for, let's just say, a burglary, something simple. They will notify the detective squad to have one of them come out to the scene, and they will also simultaneously notify us to come out to the scene. The protocol, as it's written, is the detectives have to notify our supervisors, and our supervisors have to notify us. And 9 times out of 10, they just say no.
Oh,
Call them directly. Tell us who from the detective squad is coming, and we'll come and we'll meet you there. This way, we don't have 14 people playing telephone. And then sometimes we get there before the squad does, and sometimes they get there before we do. But we also work with them often enough that we know everybody knows their job.
true. Yeah, that's really good to know because especially I don't know, but in school, like it's always like 911. You get a call from 911, and the police shows up, and the CSI unit shows up, and then the medical examiner shows up. But
Yeah, we have little crystal balls that we wait, or sometimes like an owl will come and give us a notification, like we have to get down to 43rd Street and
yeah,
go.
like the old school way. Yeah,
Yeah.
makes sense.
Hmm. So I know you're not in the field anymore, but how do you think something like COVID changed being in the field? Like, I don't know if you know any stories from old coworkers or things that you have seen or heard. Or like, how do you believe COVID changed, like maybe life in that evidence collection team or a crime scene unit or just for regular CSIs?
What's funny is COVID should not theoretically have changed that at all,
True.
because our levels of protective barriers and PPE, and I said when I started teaching, this is the best part about COVID is I don't have to tell anybody what PPE is anymore. I can just put it on the
True, true,
PowerPoint
true,
slide. We
true.
all know what this means. Theoretically, the evidence collection teams and the crime scene unit members are already going with cross-contamination prevention measures. So I think in a lot of ways that didn't change it much at all. What it did change that I know of that other people are telling me is people are terrified having you come into the apartment.
Oh, true.
So what they've adapted to now is before they get to the scene, they're walking up with the Tyvek suit on just to try to alleviate their fears a little bit. I understand that people, whatever their personal situation happens to be, having that extra level of being a little standoffish because what has this cop been doing all day? Who has he been interacting with?
Okay.
How much other person bio goo does he have on him at the moment? So I definitely understand how COVID would raise that stake in people's minds, but in terms of our protocols, it really shouldn't have changed all that much.
Okay. Yeah, that actually makes perfect sense, honestly.
Except we knew where to get the N95 mask,
True.
before it was cool.
So with so many years in service and like working as a cop and as a evidence collection unit and a detective, what was your motivation or transition for teaching? What led you to think that, oh, I want to teach now?
Teaching was my plan somewhere when I had about 10 years of service on. And right around then, I had gone and spoken with a couple of people. There was an ex-detective that I'd run into. I was in Florida, who was working in Walmart, Home Depot rather. And oh my God, how are you? What's going on? And he was okay, and he was like, it's good, and it's it's a good retirement, and they pay me nice, and the people around here are great. But you could also see in his head and his heart that he was just like crushed. And getting back in the car, and it was me and my girlfriend driving away, and I'm going, that guy with one phone call could get like $100,000 worth of tests done, and had years and years of experience and knowledge that you could see he just wants to talk to someone and explain it and do something. And I'm, at that point, I was really into what I was doing with ECT. I said, I can't just let that die, especially because people like him spent time when I was just a dum-dum, um, letting me know the better way to do it and better way to talk to people and better way to approach a situation. You can't let that level of experience die out. So the decision was made sort of right then and there that I want to, finish my 20. I want to go to, and in my case, John Jay, get my degree, and then when I retire, see about going back and maybe I can get my master's and, transition it that way. Take, you know, over the course of 15 years doing it, I probably clocked in about 8,000 crime scenes. I have about 24,000 research questions, like why did that happen, or why didn't that happen, or what's going on there. So part of it was also like lots of, why didn't that work kind of thing. But the other part of it is so many people spent so much time teaching me, and I spent so much time accruing other information that it felt like that's the way it's supposed to go, to now take the next generation and make them a little less of a dum dum when they start, as opposed to the rest of us that had to start at the baseline.
Facts.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. So if I want to start, if I'm a dum-dum starting in the field of forensics, where do you think I would get good resources and understanding for before I like just, oh, I want to do forensic and this is how my life should be? What do you think would be a good approach for someone to start?
To start with, one of the things I recommend the students a lot is, think about what the sexy CSI thing is. Like, I'm so into ballistics or forensic entomology or blood spatter. And go and look at the professional websites. Like, because there is a blood pattern organization, there is a forensic entomology organization. Everything that you think is, that thing that I really love doing, go and look at them and see, because they have lots of publications. A lot of them have literature. They have like a dum-dum rate if you don't know what you're doing to get into their conventions and things along those lines. And I've done that several times to just try to understand what are these people talking about. And a lot of times you find it's cooler than you think. And other times you find out things that you didn't understand, that maybe you'd be dealing with, like, the smell of being a forensic entomologist is a little different than expected. Um, you know, Blood pattern analysis is also a very tedious practice of how much time am I spending in a crime scene doing that type of work. Ballistics, like I said, there's thousands of things you can learn from, but I always feel like the professional organizations are the best way to start. Look at them first, because they're the gold standard. You're going to have to, be certified by anyway.
That's a wonderful suggestion, actually. I never thought of that. I just thought DNA and I went for it.
Flip coin?
Oh yeah, I flipped it. Luckily, both side was DNA. So it worked out.
Kind of cheating.
So now that you teach forensics, I guess you kind of answered this question earlier, but I guess, is there any way in your mind that you think you would have saw the field differently, like going in knowing as much as you do about forensics now as opposed to when you started?
You mean at the bachelor's level, the master's level, the dum-dum level, which?
I would say whenever you started to the amount of information now. So I guess the dum-dum level.
Oh, I really hope I never travel back in time to meet myself at those point in time, because there was a lot. There was a lot that I didn't know. There was a lot that I didn't understand in the totality of it. Not so much technique wise, swabbing, feather dusting, photography, things along those lines. I was really well prepared from day one. Matter of thinking critically and the experience that experience gives you, you sit back and you're like, I can't believe I let that guy walk right past me, kind of thing. Or, if we had this back then, it would have been so much easier. Like if you think about the people that came before, me by several years, or actually even when I first started, if you didn't have a stain that was about the size of a silver dollar, you didn't send it for DNA. You preserved it, and we hoped that someday the technology would be there. And now we have low copy DNA, and we're able to do sorcery in comparison. So that's the hard part about not looking back and saying, wow, if we only had Malditoff back then, it would be so much better. But we have to take that with a grain of salt. And in terms of the knowledge you gain, everything is supposed to go into the breadbasket and move into the next level. Fool me once, shouldn't happen more than that, kind of thing.
Exactly.
So with the changing in the technology and with the technology advancement, we, like you just mentioned, that like if it's not a spoonful of blood, you won't collect it. Like you will collect it, but won't send it for DNA. So do you think that the police academy is educated every now and then with the technology advancement, so they're aware as to now we have this techniques and this is how we should access a crime scene if you come by?
We were pretty proactive with that. The unit, we would go, I don't want to say every month, every couple of months to the precincts during their roll calls and say, all right, there's a new toy they gave us. So please don't do this at the crime scene. And then usually you got to the crime scene and somebody like, hey, I found this. Okay, thanks. Thank you. But we would also, the NYPD had every command had its own training staff, a training officer that would do little in-service trainings with people. And once a month, they would meet at the police academy for the entire day. And all of these new procedures, protocols, policies that were coming up, they would say, look, just let people know. One of the things became very, very strong is firearms for DNA processing, is tell the responding officers when they get to the scene, do not make the weapon safe. If the gun isn't in the hands of someone, if the gun isn't in danger of being, scooped up by the crowd or something along those lines, do not touch the gun. We want to get DNA off of it. The evidence collection team members are trained to do it. And if if there's a firearm platform they've never seen before, they're going to have the emergency service people do it. But don't touch the guns. And they got very serious with that, to the point where they would have meetings at the administrative level for who got to the scene, what gun was collected, what was done with the gun, who made the weapon safe. All of that had to be documented. So, as we get better and better, for lack of a better term, toys, the training has been commensurate with that and letting them know that. The one failing to that is the split between the crime scene people and the lab people. And a lot of times evidence gets collected, like a question document gets sent to the lab, and most of the crime scene people or the evidence collection people don't know what something like ESDA is, where we're going to look for indented writing, or they don't know that we can get DNA off of it, or even how the DNA functions. Like, how do you go from little swab to profile of Pat? I think some of the trainings we did with the OCME's office, where they kind of explained it, and you got to see the steps and understand that, yeah, it's really, really easy to cross-contaminate this. Put a very strong like stamp on, this is why we have to do it this way. But I think that's the only sort of shortcoming in terms of the interplay between the field people and the lab people.
And that's really good to know. So in regards to like NYPD, as it's highly sourced and you have so many resources, is it something similar like country-wise that they are taught like this, and there is a protocol that one state can work with the other state like without any barriers, or is it just an ideology that I have?
It's there's a lot of, I mean, everybody has their own different rules about it. We tend to get along pretty well with our surrounding jurisdictions. There are other places that they don't play so nicely in the playground, for whatever, of 1,000 different reasons. there are useful federal interactions that allow state to state to be as smooth as it can be. Some of the problems will go jurisdiction to jurisdiction. This county in upstate New York may not get along so well with the people in Buffalo, or the people in Suffolk County don't want to talk to the people in Nassau County, or something along those lines. As you said, we have the resources in the NYPD. There's even programs where they've offered to do evidence work for them, like ship us what you have, because we can do this DNA processing, or we can do this gunshot residue testing for you. We have the toys. By and large, I've never heard of a really negative interaction along those lines, but I do know there's some people saying, no, we're going to do it all in-house, and there's a diminished success rate if you're not keeping an open mind to what might be the better technique here.
True.
Okay.
So in regards to, sorry, Julian.
Go ahead.
I have so many questions. So in regards to your teaching experience and your field experience, so if I start my bachelor's and master's in forensics, what subjects do you think I should really hone on to if I want to work in the field of forensics?
It's really funny you say that, because I just had this conversation this morning. I teach at John Jay. I also teach at Florida Atlantic University. And I have forensic classes, obviously, in both schools, but I have a lot of non-forensic science majors, especially in Florida Atlantic. They don't even have a forensic science program. So they will say, okay, I want to do something along these lines. And then I start writing down the list, and sometimes their eyes get really big, and then other times I just watch their, little soul drain out of their inner being. Is it science? It's forensics is chemistry, and it's biology and physics, and it's to get that 4-year degree is a lot of giving up of Friday nights for a little while, especially like John Jay. The first 2 years is like nothing but organic chemistry, physics, calculus. Your junior year is where you actually start playing with some of the more dedicated forensic techniques, which is great because there's a certain dedication it takes to get to that level. Like I can't even handle a feather duster until I'm a junior. So a lot of it comes down to, how much are you willing to throw yourself into the science realm and not be afraid of it.
Yeah, that's actually a wonderful observation, because so I'm doing my PhD at Rutgers, and we have the same issue where the students want to come in and start working in the lab directly from the first day.
Yep.
And then we have to sit down and explain them that's not how it works. You really have to know the basics. And it's sad because some of them don't even know how to use a pipette, and I can't give them DNA samples to work with.
Right.
And the reagent costs like thousands of dollars. So it's a wonderful suggestion that you really need to know your basics before you.
Yeah, it's like learning a language. Science is no different than that. You start out with words, and then when you get to the next level, when you go from basic chemistry to organic chemistry, you learn sentences, and you go to biochemistry and you learn paragraphs. And then by the time you become a senior, you've forgotten everything else, and you're just winging it. But along the same lines, when I went into grad school, I had never handled a pipette either. And I was molecular biology concentration. And my mentor was like, oh, so you're just going to keep flicking those things across the room.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I say it in a much different way, but I say the same thing. But yeah, it's really necessary. Julian, you can go ahead.
I heard you talking about documents earlier, which reminds me that if you could just like briefly give us a short introduction as to what your thesis research project was at John Jay. I'm sure the people will love to hear that.
Yeah. We did it in conjunction with the NYPD lab. And the question documents unit, which is, I think, one of the best kept secrets in most labs. They have some of the coolest toys to play with. They will process documents for handwriting analysis. They'll try to get finger marks off of it. They will try to develop any indented writing that may not be readily visible. But one of the things they wanted to do is see, can we collect DNA from the paper itself? And the theory being is if I'm writing, as I'm writing across it, my wrist will scrape along the paper and maybe I'm shedding some DNA onto the paper surface itself. So that was what I got tasked for. Previous to my attempt, the only way we could get it is if we cut the paper up into little like 3 centimeter squares and then digest all of them and develop DNA that happened to be on it. My solution to that was to take a pipette, a glass pipette, and flip it and stick a swab in the one end of it and attach it to a vacuum pump. So it became a little tiny vacuum that I could glide across the surface of the paper and hopefully pull up any of the DNA that happened to be there. It actually worked, which was more surprising to me than anybody else when it actually happened. But then we accidentally discovered that not only had I been able to get the DNA out of it, we didn't interfere with any fingerprints were there. And we also didn't interfere with any of the indented writing that was there. So these were very, very happy accidents to the technique that we created. But it worked really well. On the flip side, when you're writing your thesis and you're having success after success after success, when they're going, oh, you know what, try it with this. Oh, now try it with this. You're going,
yeah.
You're going, I'm never graduating. Okay. But it was a really cool project to work on. Which is the other thing, if you get into forensics, especially when you get to your graduate level, don't get enamored of what it is you think you want to work on. Because when I worked with my mentor, I thought I was working with cartridge casings, and I was going to go to the range and I'm going to shoot a couple of guns and I'm going to get DNA off the casings or the bullets and no, I was working on scraps of paper, and it was so much cooler than what my first thought line was. So a lot of times that's hard to get around when you have this mindset of I'm going to split the atom. Nope, I'm gonna just do the atom's laundry in this particular case.
That's a really interesting study. You might not even have picked up inhibitors like ink and things like that. Well,
nope, we didn't get any
really
of the dye out of the paper.
Yeah.
It was I'm gonna pretend it was genius, but it was just totally like this is I can't believe this works sort of thing. And then even better, when you invent an apparatus that's only costs about 6 cents to make, people tend to be a lot happier with you as opposed to $1,000, like you said, $1,000 for PCR reagents.
Yeah, that's really amazing.
Do you have a name for this?
We call it the Patty Mac vac.
Amazing, beautiful.
We have to find a PMV and turn it into something like pneumatic vacuum or something, but it's really the Patty Mac vac. And then the NYPD adapted it. A couple of other agencies have adapted it and did their validation studies with it. But what's also funny is having some of the people that we were in school with who now work at the PD lab and other students that have like, we got briefed on the Patty Mac vac today.
That is very cool. That's very, very cool.
That's so cool. That's amazing. That's awesome. I would have never thought of that. Julian, we are not in that category.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Desperate and tired, you're fine.
I'll give you the mic, Julian.
Well, I think I'm happy. Are you happy, Nitty?
Yeah.
Are you happy, Pat?
I'm always happy, you know that.
I think we got some beautiful hair, son. And I think we can wrap this up. Pat, we want to thank you for coming. Next time we got to have you back. You got to bring the Patty Mac back so we can see how it looks.
Definitely.
And, yeah.
And we are so sorry if I asked so many questions when I said that I'm not going to talk.
True.
Thank you so much, Pat. Thank you.